Disclaimer.
The views presented do not necessarily express the views of the host organization.
The GPMC webinar are for education and information only.
Welcome one and all to Alternative Realities. This is one of many webinars that's been carefully curated for you as a community by GPMC, PPIM, and MAAFIM. Let me introduce these organizations that have come together to galvanize this movement that we are all part of as a community, global and local. And so these are very courageous organizations, and here I am to introduce you to them. And my name is Wai-Ching, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. So GPMC is Gerakan Postmortem COVID-19, and it is to mengembalikan hak dan kedaulatan manusia sejagat, which is restoring universal human rights and sovereignty. And PPIM stands for Persatuan Pengguna Islam Malaysia. Kembalikan hak dan maruah pengguna dengan bijaksana, to restore consumer rights with dignity and judiciously. MAFIM is the Malaysian Association for Advancement of Functional and Interdisciplinary Medicine, an association where everyone can experience their optimal health and well-being through interdisciplinary medicine and its sustainable model of healthcare. So we are here together to create new systems. And in these times of chaos and confusion, many of us are confronted with the questions of what is truth, what is reality. And there's so many layers to these multidimensional perspectives that each one of us as individuals, as well as the collective, have to address. And this is what we are aiming to do here, is to bring in different perspectives so that each one of us can discern our personal truths and act on it, to create a better future for all of us, to create better systems of healthcare, better legal systems, better governmental systems, and to move forward into the future generations. So tonight, or today, wherever you are, we have a rather controversial platform, and please stay open-hearted and open-minded to some of the content that will be revealed, and that we come together as a community to discuss and to plan a strategy to create a better reality for all of us. And we have an opportunity to make a change, and we invite you as a community to get in touch with GPMC on their Facebook page and to participate as a contributor of questions, of content, and donations if you can, to support the work. Everybody's on a volunteer basis, and we consider you listening in as part of the community and part of the global movement. And so one of the people who will be with us today is Dr. Poornima Wagh, and it is a great privilege to have her here, as also with Dr. Heine Fühnig later. And we would like to welcome her to give us her personal account of her experiences. And it is deep, it is controversial and explosive. And however, many scientists are starting to corroborate with these findings. So I invite Dr. Poornima Wagh to address us.
I'm Poornima Wagh, and thank you again for that brief introduction. That was very a warm introduction there. I have a PhD in virology and another PhD in immunology. My background is also in finance and economics, but mainly I got into the sciences after that because my family is pretty much all of them on my mother and my dad's side are all in the sciences. So I've always sort of been affiliated with the sciences and attracted to the sciences from a very early age. And my father worked for Pfizer. So in this case, with what's going on with COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2, the alleged virus, I have a special attraction to it, partially because my dad worked for Pfizer, and Pfizer is doing a lot of damage to us right now. Nonetheless, I am going to present to all of you my presentation on SARS-CoV-2, the supposed virus that causes COVID-19. And I'm going to let you know that after all the testing that we've done, that SARS-CoV-2, the virus that supposedly causes COVID-19, does not exist. So I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation, if that's okay, with the team. Yes?
Please do.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to start with the first slide here. I am going to delve very deeply into the isolation, purification, characterization, and causation procedures of SARS-CoV-2. What this essentially is, you have to isolate, purify, and characterize a virus. It's called the gold standard in virology, medical microbiology, and pathology. You have to show that the virus exists and that the virus actually causes the symptoms or the disease. That's what these few words mean right here. I want to go quickly into my credentials. I have a Bachelor of Science in Finance from Salisbury University in Salisbury, Maryland, in the United States. I graduated in December of 1995. I have an MBA in Finance and Economics from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, also in the United States, and graduated in May 2000. I was a lab technician and a clinical lab scientist thereafter at Santa Barbara City College and the University of California, Santa Barbara, here in Santa Barbara, where I live presently in California, USA. And I worked there in the microbiology lab. I also worked briefly at the University of Texas, Austin, from 2016 to 2019 in the molecular biology lab. And I worked in Santa Barbara City College and UCSB, which is University of California, Santa Barbara, from 2005 to 2011 in the microbiology lab. Thereafter, I got my 2 PhDs, one in virology and one in immunology, respectively. I graduated in December of 2016, and I got the PhDs from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in London, England. So I'm going to move on. I'm going to dive directly into the isolation, purification, and characterization of a virus. So in order to prove a germ or a virus, so any germ, bacteria or fungus or a virus, and it causing a set of symptoms or a disease, one has to show a gold standard proof that the virus or bacteria or any other germ exists. And secondly, that the germ actually causes the disease or symptoms. My question is this. So have the Centers for Disease Control, or as I call them, the Centers for Disease Creation in the United States, and the FDA and the WHO, or any scientific lab or academic lab anywhere on this planet in the last 2.5 years, have they ever isolated SARS-CoV-2, which is the supposed virus that causes COVID-19? The answer to that is a big no. And let me prove to you why that is a big no. So what exactly is virology? Is virology a fraudulent field? I'm a virologist. My answer to that is yes. It's a huge scam, pretty much. So the $1 million question is, how do virologists isolate, purify, and characterize a virus in the lab? Now, there's a right way and a wrong way to isolate, purify, and characterize a virus. I'm first going to go into the wrong way that virologists, conventional virologists to this day, use to isolate, purify, and characterize a virus. And this wrong way or fraudulent way has been used by virologists to isolate, purify, and characterize a virus since 1952. And this is because of virologist John Enders, who was an American virologist, and he worked on the polio vaccine. And he did a lot of work in polio, and he had a vested interest in bringing the polio vaccine into the market. And so he had to create fraudulent tests to prove that the polio virus actually exists. And so he started this fraudulent isolation technique, which exists to this day in the field of virology. So virologists do not really isolate viruses at all. And we'll see how they isolate viruses the wrong way, which is a fraudulent method, versus the correct way to isolate a virus. So let me give you a definition of isolation according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary. It means to separate from another substance so as to obtain a pure or free state of culture. Okay, so it has to be, you have to separate the virus from everything else in the culture. Now, the wrong and fraudulent way to isolate and purify virus, I'm going to actually go into that in detail. So, like I said, since 1952, since the time of John Enders, they've been doing the wrong way of isolation and purification of a virus. And they've done the same thing, the same fraudulent method of isolation for SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 as well. So this is the wrong way of doing an isolation. So what you do is first you get a lung fluid sample, which is also called the aspirate. So it's called a lung aspirate from a patient. So you get the lung fluid from a patient who has tested positive for COVID-19, either through what I call the bogus PCR test, because the PCR test is completely bogus. It's not a diagnostic test. Or you just take it, even if you haven't tested positive for COVID, you take a lung aspirate or a lung fluid from a person, and then you mix the lung fluid from the patient in foreign tissue culture. So you have, what they do is they mix the lung fluid with other things, and these other things are they put infected monkey kidney cells, which are called Viro6 cells. Then to that, they add human lymphoma, which is cancer cells. Sometimes they also add HeLa cells, and HeLa cells are essentially they're cervical cancer cells from cervical cancer tissue. And this came from a Black woman by the name of Henrietta Lacks. So they've used the name from Henrietta Lacks. You get HeLa, and she had cervical cancer in the 1950s. They used her tumor. They removed her tumor from the cervix, and they're using that cell line, that cell tissue culture, and they're using it in this case. Then to this mess, they also add antibiotics, and some of the names of the antibiotics are very, very powerful and toxic antibiotics, which are like gentamicin, amphotericin B, vancomycin, etc. And these are very old types of antibiotics. These are not newer forms of antibiotics. Sometimes they also add antifungal drugs, which are also called azole drugs. And then to that, they have to add more stuff. They add these protein dissolving enzymes. These protein dissolving enzymes are called proteolytic enzymes. An example of that is trypsin. Then they also add something called bovine calf serum. So essentially it is blood from an unborn calf. And that is usually added as food to keep the cell culture from starving to death. So let me quickly say what we've done here. We've taken the lung cells from a patient who has tested positive for COVID-19. And to that, we've added all this toxic stuff, infected monkey kidney cells, cancer cells, antibiotics, antifungals, calf bovine serum, and then protein dissolving enzymes. And then this whole toxic mess is left to hang around in a petri dish for up to a week or even more, like 10 days. And this toxic soup, it starts disintegrating and falling apart. It starts breaking. And the human lung cells in this toxic soup, they start breaking apart. The cell membrane which surrounds the cells, it breaks. And then you get all these little particles that come out from within the cell. And like I've mentioned that all these things, all the antibiotics and antifungals, they start actually working on the cells, on the human cells, and breaking it down, because all these things are very toxic. So what happens is, when all these tiny particles are coming out of the human cell, the human lung tissue, you look at it under a scanning electron microscope, and they look at this stuff and they say, oh my goodness, these little particles are viruses. Now, please remember, when you say that something is a virus, you have to test for it. You have to do a biochemical test. And they never do biochemical analysis on these little particles that are coming out. And they just call it a virus. So they assume it's a virus. They have never tested for it. And actually in reality, these tiny particles that are actually coming out are just parts of the human cell itself, because the human cell is breaking down from all the toxicity of all this mess, and it is breaking down, and all that cellular debris is coming out. But virologists unfortunately call that stuff a virus. Now, once they observe these tiny particles that come out of the poison cell, they immediately name it a virus. They don't do any chemical tests on it. And by logic of a 6-year-old, we can conclude that the cytopathic effects, cytopathic essentially means, it's a fancy word for the cell poisoning by these toxic substances like antibiotics and cancer cells, etc. And because of all the antibiotics, etc., you are seeing the toxicity in the human cell. And what the virologists don't realize is that the cytopathic effects, or why the cell is breaking down, is because of things like the antibiotics, the fungus, the fungal stuff that they've added in there, the antifungals. It could be cancer cell residue, bovine calf residue, bovine calf serum residue, and anything else except it's not an isolated virus. So what they call an isolated virus is not an isolated virus. It is just part of the human tissue breaking down. Now, they make things even worse and make it even more anti-scientific, because they don't do any control studies. So a control study is where you have to, you run something where you don't add all these toxic substances, and you do it in pure culture. So they don't do any of those studies. They just put this toxic soup together, everything breaks down, and they call whatever's coming out of the cell, they call it a virus. Then they take this whole toxic soup that I just mentioned, and they inject all of it into a poor animal like a mouse or a ferret. And then they look to see if the ferret or mouse has any kind of symptoms. Now, if the animal dies, they say the virus has caused the death or the disease. And if the animal dies right away, they say, oh my goodness, look at that. The virus is horribly deadly. So by what logic, my question is, by what logic is this isolation or purification? It really isn't. It is just fraud, because you have not isolated a virus, because you're looking at a toxic soup. You have not removed the virus from this toxic soup. So that is fraudulent. Now, there were 5 papers that came out very early on in January and February and even March of 2020, when this COVID-19 scam started all over the world. And I have a list here that I'm not going to go into detail of all the papers that came out. Most of them are from China, 1 or 2 are from South Korea, and I think 1 is from McGill University in Canada. And if you look at each of these papers, you look at the methodology section in the paper. The methodology section describes exactly what I just described, what they were doing with this toxic soup. So the methodology in all these 5 papers is wrong. That is not how you isolate a virus. Now, let me describe the correct and the scientific way of how you isolate, purify, and characterize a virus. Now, prior to 1955 and John Enders and the polio virus debacle, virology was a fairly good field. I mean, they didn't have that much fraud going on. But after that, it just got worse and worse. Now, I'm going to describe what we did in our lab that I worked in to do the isolation and purification procedures. So only my lab and 6 other labs that I personally know of in the United States or anywhere else on this planet have isolated, purified, and characterized the lung fluids of supposed COVID positive patients in the correct scientific methodology. And I will describe that below. Now, the correct way to isolate and purify is as follows. You extract the lung fluid from a patient and then who has tested positive for COVID-19. And in our case, our lab had already acquired the COVID positive samples beforehand in a large batch of 15. We got 1,500 samples. These were all COVID positive samples, and they were from Southern California. And so we didn't have to perform what is called the lung aspiration directly because we already had the samples. Now, you take the uncontaminated lung fluid that I just described from a patient who has tested COVID positive, and you put that through something called a gravity filtration process. So the gravity filtration process is like a coffee filter. And what that does is that coffee, it's not a coffee filter, but it's something like a coffee filter. It's more scientific. And the filter is very, very fine. So the pores or the holes in it are very, very small. And what it does, it only catches the debris, like cellular debris from a person, pollen, whatever else that was in this culture, in this lung fluid that should, the big particles like bacteria, fungi, etc. And the only thing that goes down into the beaker is the virus particles and the other fluid that should go through. And this liquid that's collected at the bottom is called a filtrate. And sometimes the gravity filtration, we also attach a vacuum pump to it so that the liquid goes much faster through the filter paper. Now, once you collect this liquid at the bottom, which is called the filtrate in the beaker, then you run that solution through something called a density gradient centrifugation process. So essentially, it's a centrifuge machine which spins really fast. That's what this is. It's called a density gradient centrifugation. And you pour the solution into a test tube. And in the test tube, you also put these silicon beads. They're made out of silica. And then you add a sugar solution called a sucrose solution, or sometimes you add another solution called cesium chloride. And then the whole test tube is spun at very high speeds. And what it does is it separates out all the layers in their respective densities. So whatever is heavy goes to the bottom, whatever is light goes to the top, and you see these layers. Now the virus layer, you see it's a band that it forms, and it forms at 1.16 nanograms per liter. That you have to measure it, and that measurement, when you see that is where the virus layer is. So then what you do is you take something called a micropipette. It's like a little tube, a sucking tube, and you suck out that layer, that virus layer, and you put it into a petri dish. Now, once you micropipette the viral particles into a sterile petri dish, you have to biochemically analyze and genetically sequence all of this material that you just got. And you have to do this through a process called Sanger sequencing, or a DNA extraction process called the Maxim Gilbert DNA sequencing. I know these sound like these are big fancy words, but essentially what we're doing is you're sequencing the genome of the virus. And you also have to be able to see these virus particles under a scanning electron microscope. And you have to make sure that all these particles are the same size, same shape and structure, and it's called the morphology. That means they have to be one uniform size. This whole process that I just described is called the isolation, purification, and characterization of the virus. Now, the next step is called the causation studies, and this is the gold standard of this entire protocol. So what you have to do is you have to show without a shadow of doubt that the virus that you just extracted is causing all the symptoms that you saw in the COVID patient, okay? And the symptoms have to be exactly the same, not similar, but the exact symptoms in a healthy animal. So what you do is you take this liquid that you just got, that you extracted, and you have to now inject it into healthy animals like a ferret or a mouse. And this whole methodology of injecting these virus particles you just got into a healthy animal is called the 4 Koch's postulates. Now, the 4 Koch's postulates are very, very simple. I'll quickly go through those. It says the microorganism, in this case a virus, must be found in abundance in all organisms suffering from the disease, but should not be found in healthy organisms. The microorganism must be isolated from a diseased organism and grown in pure culture. Then the cultured microorganism should cause disease when introduced into a healthy organism, and the microorganism must be re-isolated from the inoculated diseased experimental host and identified as being identical to the original specific causative agent. To make this very simple, what this is really saying is you have to take the virus particles you just extracted, inject them into a healthy animal like a ferret or mouse. And the ferret or mouse should be completely healthy, should not have any problems, no disease or anything. You have to look at the symptoms, and you have to make sure the symptoms that you see in them are identical to the symptoms you saw in the COVID-19 patient. Then once you see those symptoms in that animal, you take the culture out of that animal and put it into another healthy animal, and you have to do this 3 times. And then you prove, doing that, you prove as for a matter of fact that the virus is actually causing that particular disease. This is Koch's postulate. Now, in addition to the gold standards of Koch's postulates, the other thing we have to remember is that a correctly and scientifically isolated and purified virus should have an intact genome of between 30,000 to 40,000 base pairs. Now, in the case of the Wuhan patient 0, they only got 40 base pairs in the sequence. So they only found a small little fragment of the virus, and they said that was a virus. You cannot just find 40 base pairs and call it a virus. You have to find the entire intact genome. And I need people to understand that viruses, just like us, their DNA has what is called 4 base pairs or nucleic acids. And these 4 base pairs are called adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. And these are usually in DNA viruses or even the DNA of people. But when there's an RNA virus, so the coronavirus that we are seeing right now, SARS-CoV-2 is supposedly a coronavirus, that is called an RNA virus. And the thiamine group is replaced by another nucleic acid called uracil. Now, virologists, they couldn't prove much through Koch's postulates. So there was a virologist in the 1930s by the name of Thomas Rivers, and he came up with something called the Rivers criteria in 1937 to prove that viruses exist. So what they did is they modified Koch's postulates, and they put those postulates, these Rivers criteria, they made those specifically for the virus. Now, I'm not going to really go through this because it's a lot of material on there, but essentially the only difference from Koch's postulates to Rivers criteria is that in Rivers criteria, they use antibody testing. So that's the only difference. But even the Rivers criteria just doesn't make much sense. They've modified it, but it's not correct. Now, let me go into how the isolation, purification, and causation findings. Let me give you some background information and how I got into this mess in the first place myself. So in mid-April 2020, I was contacted by the chief scientist of my lab, who's also called a principal investigator. And I'm going to keep all the lab names and locations private due to security issues. She said that they've received 1,500 COVID positive samples from all over Southern California, and they needed to be stringently tested via isolation and purification. So this person gave me a call. I was living in California. She said, hey, we've received a huge $1.5 million grant from the National Institutes of Health here in the United States, and we need you to help us work on the isolation of this virus. So I went ahead and agreed to the studies, but I said, hey, I want to do the isolation the correct way. And if you allow me to do it the correct way, I will do the isolation procedures. If you don't allow me to do it the correct way, I do not want to do the isolation studies. After a lot of back and forth on the phone, she agreed, and I decided to do the isolation studies. So we started out with 20 lab members. I was the senior lab scientist, and we started the whole procedure of isolation, purification, and and the causation studies on these 1,500 samples. We had 1,500 samples. We used close to 800 samples in total. We didn't use all 1,500. And we did the isolation procedures exactly like I've just described in the previous slides. And we ended our studies in September of 2020. So we started in April of 2020, finished in September of 2020. Unfortunately, we had to do it 3 different times. We had to do the studies 1, 2, 3 different times because my boss, who was the principal investigator, kept saying that we had some kind of a contamination problem. So it was frustrating, but we did 3 rounds of testing, and what we found is the same thing. There was no virus. There was absolutely no virus in our testing. So as far as the causation studies with the 4 Koch's postulates go, we used ferrets as our subjects. So we used the testing animals we used were ferrets, and we also had a control group, and we used ferrets for that. Now the control group of ferrets was injected with a saline solution. And after 3 rounds of extensive testing, we only found human cellular debris. There was no sign of an intact 30,000 to 40,000 base pair virus or anything even remotely close to the in silico genome of the SARS-CoV-2 virus after all the biochemical analysis was performed. So essentially, in silico means computer generated. So whatever computer generated genome they had, when we compared what we found to the genome that the WHO and Wuhan had posted on the databases, there was nothing in common. They didn't even look the same. What we found was just human cells. And what they were saying is SARS-CoV-2, this is it. So they weren't even the same. So in fact, the ferrets that were injected with the isolated, purified SARS-CoV-2 positive samples, they were in excellent shape. Nothing happened to them. They never experienced fevers, runny noses, bilateral pneumonia, or hypoxia. Hypoxia essentially means lack of oxygen. So they never had any of these symptoms that the human counterparts were seeing who were COVID positive. So the only small side effect that the ferrets were, like 10 of the ferrets, injected ferrets, were seeing is they lost some fur on their tail. But losing fur on your tail is not a symptom of COVID-19, okay? So remember, the test subjects have to show the same symptoms of disease as the infected humans through Koch's postulates. So when we took these results, what we found was that we didn't find any virus. We asked our boss, I asked my boss to contact other universities so they could actually do the same, studies and the isolation procedures and see if they saw the same thing that we saw. She finally contacted a bunch of universities, and then 6 university labs. They decided to replicate our studies with the same exact methodology of isolation and purification that we had followed in our lab. Now, the result of these 6 universities' labs, they found the same thing that we did. They did not find any virus. What they found was just human cellular debris. There was no trace of virus anywhere close to SARS-CoV-2. So our lab and all these 6 labs, now we're 7 labs. So 6 of these labs, 5 actually were in California. It shouldn't say 6, it should say 5. And 1 was in the East Coast. And so altogether we were 7. The thing is, we decided to take our findings to the CDC, and we talked to the director of the CDC, Robert Redfield. And what he said was just very sad. It was just very disappointing, his reaction to what we had to tell him. When we said, hey, we did not find any viruses. What we found was just regular human cells. And it was a 2.5-hour Zoom call. And he said to us, you have to call it SARS-CoV-2. I don't care what you found. If you don't call it SARS-CoV-2, we'll shut down your lab. You're not going to have jobs. You're not going to have careers. I mean, essentially, we were threatened. That's what he did. So all the labs that were on that call, we said, we're not going to call it SARS-CoV-2. We're not going to go along with this nonsense. And we essentially, that was the end of the call. We refused to go along with what the CDC was trying to do to us. In our case, our lab decided to publish our findings, and we tried to publish our findings in 21 different journals. We tried to publish in the journal Nature, in Science, PLOS ONE. These are just some of the examples. And by October 21st, by October 2021, actually, we tried, the last journal we went through is the Danish Medical Journal. And none of these journals wanted to publish us. So we never got published. Now, over a 2-month period from June 2020 to early August 2020, we urged the CDC to send us just one isolated purified sample of SARS-CoV-2. And they made every excuse to not send a single sample to us. First, they said we don't have a sample. Then they said we can't send a sample. Then they just ignored all our telephone calls. They would just hang up on us. Then if we were sending emails, they just ignored all our emails. So it was just a mess. We could not deal with the CDC because the CDC was not on our side. Our lab, the lab that I worked in, was raided by the FBI in late 2021. All our computers, drafts, paperwork, etc., were confiscated and possibly destroyed. But we had backups. Our lab members had put backups together of paperwork and everything. And 2 members of my lab committed suicide, apparently, one in August 2021 and one in early February of 2022, which I don't think those were suicides. I think they were taken out. And right now, I'm working with my postdoc colleagues from my former lab, and we're trying to privately publish our findings, so our studies. And the other lab in California that did these isolation studies, they were also raided by the FBI at about the same time that our lab was raided by the FBI last year in April 21. So in conclusion, this is really important to remember. There is no SARS-CoV-2 virus. I have just proven that with the most accurate scientific methodology of isolation and purification using their own techniques. When I say their, I mean the conventional techniques of testing, which is the correct technique that I've described, and the gold standards of Koch's postulates. Hence, there is no, in my opinion, and my scientific opinion, through proof, there is no COVID-19, there is no SARS-CoV-2 virus, there are no variants, there is no Gamma variant, no Delta variant, no Omicron variant, there's no monkeypox virus. The monkeypox virus is just an effect of the COVID-19 injections. And any of the other stuff they're saying that's coming out as a virus does not exist. There's actually no viruses floating around. We do not have a pandemic, and there's nothing going on. So by their own criteria of isolation and purification, done the wrong way, it implicates them. So not only have they failed miserably to meet the 4 Koch's postulates and their own modifications of reverse criteria, but there's no virus. So, any which way you look at this, there is absolutely no virus whatsoever. Now, last but not the least, they've done such a shoddy job of the in silico genome. So this whole virus thing came out as a computer-generated genome from Wuhan. There was never an actual virus in reality. The virus was actually made up on a computer, and the made-up computer-generated genome is called an in silico de novo genome. Okay? And this was actually found by conventional Indian researchers in February of 2020. They actually exposed it. And because they found these suspicious HIV spike proteins in the SARS-CoV-2 genome, and they published a paper. And when they published the paper in January of 2020, they were forced to retract their paper. It was a fantastic paper because they saw the fraud of this, and because they saw these HIV spike proteins that were put into this viral genome. because there's no real virus. This whole virus is a genome that they made up on the computer. That's all we really need to know. This whole thing is a fraud, and it was the entire genome of SARS-CoV-2, which does not exist in reality, was made up on a computer. So again, there's no SARS-CoV-2 virus which causes COVID-19. And I think that is the conclusion of my presentation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Poornima. So people, what do you feel, what do you think about all this? And send in your question. There's a lot to digest. And I know it'll take a little time to really let everything sink in, what Poornima has just said. And we have, let's see, any questions that would be coming in from you. But in the meantime, we have one actually that, yes, that's a very simple one, Poornima. Then what were people getting sick from? And you had mentioned exosomes and the debris. So there were some other factors that were causing people to be so sick.
Well, in 2020, at least in the United States, and I'm guessing this is the same in other countries all over the world, people were not really getting sick. They were just getting sick like they always do every year. People get sick, they have comorbidities, they have other diseases like cancer and Alzheimer's and heart disease, diabetes, and they end up, getting sick because they're not eating properly, they're not sleeping properly. Their lives, there's massive amounts of negativity in people's lives. Stress does a major number on your body. When you get stressed out, your body falls apart. So that is what was making people sick. There was no virus. And if you look at the number of people that actually died in the year 2020, I'm not talking about 2021, just 2020, the number of people that actually died, I'm talking about the United States, 60,000 less people died. And these are CDC numbers. The total number of deaths were 60,000 less in 2020 than in 2019. So where is the pandemic is my question. So what they were doing is all the people that died in 2020 from every other cause, heart attacks, cancer, this, that, and something else, they were reclassifying that and calling that a COVID death. And they were doing that not just in the United States, they were doing that all over the world. So there was no pandemic. They were just calling it a pandemic. The other thing that they were doing is the PCR test. The PCR is a bogus test. It's not a diagnostic test. You use it to identify RNA and DNA. And to replicate. That means to make copies of DNA and RNA. You don't use it as a diagnosis. Okay, it's not a diagnostic test. And the PCR test itself, what they put on the PCR test is they put human RNA on it. That 40 base pairs that I was talking about, they found in Wuhan from patient 0. That is not viral RNA. It is human RNA. That's what they've programmed the PCR test with. So when people test on the PCR test, when you're sick, the body releases RNA and DNA from your cells. And so when you're sick and you put that thing up your nose, you test positive because you're testing positive for being human, because that PCR test is actually coded with human RNA. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And they were also, the number of cycles that they were running was 40 to 50. It's called threshold cycles. There were 50 to 60 cycles. Sometimes they were running 45 to 50, sometimes higher than that. You cannot run more than 25 cycles on PCR. And so they were fraudulently making up numbers. They were inflating the numbers through PCR tests. So it was a testing pandemic. It was not a real pandemic. It was essentially from testing. And then the other people who were dying were just dying like they always do every year. So there was absolutely no pandemic, and people weren't dying from a virus. They were dying from other causes. I hope that answers the question.
Exactly. We are also going to explore what other causes like the 5G radiation and radiation
Correct.
In the upcoming webinars, people. So please stay tuned and then really stay in touch with us as a movement. And you touched on a few different points, Poornima, that the PCR test being false, and there are a lot of false positives, but also, that there's something that's called ethylene oxide at the end of the
Yes.
swabs, and that itself is carcinogenic. Have you done tests on that?
Well, I have not done tests on the PCR swabs, but there is an Italian nanobiologist by the name of Dr. Antonietta Gatti, and she has actually written a paper on the testing. She actually tested the PCR swabs, and they're different PCR swabs. They're different brands of PCR swabs, but they all come from China. Every single one of them is made in China, and then it's distributed all over the planet. And every single PCR swab from different companies had either heavy metal contamination, it had hydrogel on it. Hydrogel is a kind of a preservative. It's an adjuvant. And it also had ethylene oxide, which is a very toxic gas-like substance. And so when you put all that stuff up your nose, you suffer nosebleeds, and people were having COVID-like symptoms just from the PCR tests being put up their nose, the swabs being put up their nose. People lost their sense of taste, lost their sense of smell, because they were going way up here. And this area here is called the cribriform plate. It's very, very sensitive. And you've got the nerves coming out from your brain going through your nose, the olfactory nerves. And when you're shoving stuff up there, which is poisonous and toxic, you're going to cause harm and injury to the body. And ethylene oxide is a very toxic substance. It causes cancer and other problems. So yes, so the PCR swabs are very, very toxic and poisonous, and nobody should put those things up their nose. And I need to talk about this. This is very important to point out, and nobody else has been pointing this out. Even people in the alternative media haven't said anything about it. Is in my career as a scientist for 20 years, we've never used a PCR swab going up people's noses. I've never seen anybody going up anybody's noses. A PCR swab is always used in your mouth as a cheek swab. It's a saliva swab. They take saliva. You never go up somebody's nose. This is the first time I've ever seen anybody going up people's nose. And I think that they had a sinister purpose going up somebody's nose. So maybe they were trying to put something there. I don't know. These are just guesses.
It's been alleged. Yes, it's been alleged that they actually.
Why would you want to go up somebody's nose when you can go inside the mouth, right?
Yes.
Doesn't make sense to me. But yeah, the PCR swabs were highly contaminated and very toxic.
Yes, and also so quickly absorbed through the bloodstream, through the mucosa.
Correct.
Right. And then just to further a little bit about ingredients like ethylene oxide, you have done a lot of research on the ingredients that's found in the experimental drugs, the vaccines. And so there's what alerted me at the beginning was that it listed aluminum and PEG, polyethylene glycol, right? And which I knew was already banned from the cosmetic industry. And it's incredulous that these adjuvants are in the experimental drugs and the vaccines. Could you give us a list of what you have found and how they're toxic to the human body?
Yeah. So we tested an assorted array of, I have 18 scientists working with me from all over the world. So these people are all over the world. We have people in Argentina, in China, in India, Philippines, Australia, New Zealand. And then, of course, we are here, two of us, me and a friend of mine who's an analytical chemist. And then we have 2 scientists in Russia. So they're spread out all over the world. So that way we can test all the vaccines, all the COVID-19 injections all over the world, not just Pfizer, Moderna, not just the American, but literally the American ones. We're testing the American vaccines, the European vaccines, the Chinese vaccines, the Russian vaccines. And all these so-called vaccines are all the same. There's no difference in the platform. So they're saying that Pfizer, officially, they're saying that Pfizer and Moderna have mRNA and spike proteins in them. They don't. Then they're saying the Sputnik V, which is Russian, and the Chinese ones, which are, I think the Chinese are inactivated vaccines, the Sinopharm and Sinovac, that they're conventional vaccines, inactivated virus. And the AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, they're called what is called viral vector. So you hollow out a virus and you shove all the spike protein and stuff in it, and then you put it put all of that into the injection. None of that is true. This is just the official scam story that, all these vaccines are different. They're not different. They're all the same. 120 governments got together and they distributed one vaccine platform. This is the vaccine platform. It is hydrogel, which is an adjuvant.
Mhm.
And then inside the hydrogel, they have a lipid nanoparticle. What is a lipid nanoparticle? The lipid part of it is synthetic, so it's made in a lab. So in the case of Pfizer, the lipid is called polyethylene glycol. It's a cholesterol derivative. In the case of Moderna, it's called SM-102. And then they mix the SM-102 with other things to make the lipid nano. And then you have reduced graphene oxide particles in this little sandwich. And you also have massive amounts of heavy metals. So you have things like aluminum hydroxide, which is an adjuvant. You've got tungsten, osmium, lead, titanium, gold, silver, stainless steel. They've put iron, chromium. They've put pretty much anything and everything. All sorts of heavy metals are in there: magnesium, lithium. So it's a chemical cocktail. It's not a bioweapon. People think it's a bioweapon. It's not a bioweapon. There's no biological stuff in these vaccines. It is a straight up chemical cocktail of toxins, of hydrogel, synthetic lipid nanoparticles, heavy metal toxicity, or massive amounts of heavy metals, and reduced graphene oxide. And it is the reduced graphene oxide and the synthetic lipid nanos and the heavy metals that are causing all the heart attacks, the myocarditis, the pericarditis, because our bodies are electric, and the graphene oxide is also extremely electric and magnetic particle, and it goes and completely destroys the electrical activity in our body. And then the body goes through massive inflammation, and that's how you get things like blood clots, myocarditis, and stuff like that. It is all from massive inflammation inside the body. So that's what's happening. There is no mRNA, there's no spike protein, none of that stuff is true. It's just, it's all total fiction.
Right. Thank you for addressing that, Poornima. Also, as a reminder to everybody, we are going to address these issues in the future of webinars with detox protocols so that you can use at home, and also to suggest to your medical professionals. And so I have another question here from Dr. Rima. And it is, does the in silico virome with the HIV spikes cause illness when manufactured by the body? Does it cause illness as reported by many scientists?
The spike protein, the 5 HIV spikes, which are called the S1, S2 subunits or glycoproteins, which are actually inserted within the in silico computer generated genome, they are fiction. There is no spike protein. The spike protein it's a made up construct. It's only on the computer. How can you take a spike protein made up on the computer and make it real? There's no way to take something from the computer and make it real. It's fiction. I guess what I'm trying to get to people is that you cannot make a spike protein that doesn't exist. You cannot make it out of thin air. It was just made up on the computer, just like the actual genome that was made up on the computer. The SARS-CoV-2 is a computer virus. It's not a real virus. It doesn't exist in reality. It is not a bioweapon. They never made anything in the lab. You cannot make a virus. You cannot weaponize a virus or a bacteria in a lab. It's impossible. We do not have the technology to weaponize anthrax or make a new virus in the lab. You cannot throw a bunch of protein fragments and nucleic acids and make a new virus. We do not have the technology to do that. If anybody tells you that technology exists, they're lying. We don't have that technology in the labs. I know, because I'm a lab scientist. I work in the labs. So the only thing they can do is put a bunch of chemicals, toxic chemicals, into these vaccines and inject you. So COVID-19 was a smokescreen. SARS-CoV-2 does not exist in reality. COVID-19 does not exist. It was just an excuse to bring in the vaccines. The vaccines are the killers. The vaccine is what's killing people. There was no COVID-19. There was no SARS-CoV-2. Nobody was dying of COVID-19 in 2020. The real dying started in 2021 and late 2020 when they introduced the jabs. When they started jabbing people all over the planet in November of 2020 and on, people are dying from the vaccines en masse. So that's the only reliable way to kill people is through an injection. You cannot kill people any other way. You cannot put a virus out there in the air. It doesn't work that way. That's not how biology works. You can't put anything through a plane. You can't fly over and spread particles of viruses or bacteria. It does not work that way, folks. The only way to get something into your body is to directly put it into your bloodstream. It has to go direct. It has to be injected. Why do you think they're pushing the vaccine so hard? If they could kill you by spraying you, wouldn't they have done it already? We have to use logic and common sense here. So I hope that answers Dr. Rima's question. So
she has another one, and there are loads of questions for you, Poornima, so get ready for them. So another one for Dr. Rima is that, can you please discuss transfection, the contamination of the unjabbed by the jabbed? What is being delivered to the unjabbed?
There is nothing being delivered to the unjabbed. Shedding and transfection, those are that's fiction and myth. It's all fear-mongering and complete nonsense. If nobody is getting contaminated by when you inject something into somebody's body, whether it's a protein, whether it's any kind of chemical or anything like that, the body processes all of that. Okay. If you even shed skin cells, the skin cells are inert. So if you inject something into somebody's body, if they are shedding skin cells and something is coming out of those skin cells, the moment it hits the air or oxygen, they get denatured. And denatured is a fancy word for if it's a protein that's coming out of your skin, for example. Say, hypothetically, let's say they injected a spike protein, but there's no spike protein. I'm just using a hypothetical case here, okay? If they injected that, and if it was coming out of your skin, right, out of your pores, the spike protein has been processed by your body already. What's coming out is completely inert. It's inactive. It dies. It's dead. Okay? There's nothing alive. So anything coming out of your skin is dead, out of your skin cells. So you are not shedding anything. So if people are hugging somebody or holding hands, or if they're living with someone and they feel sick, it is through something called bioresonance. And bioresonance is where our bodies talk to other people's bodies. We have a communication system where we do a lot of our DNA is like antenna and radio, transmitters. They talk, our systems talk to each other. Our bodies talk to each other. And if you're close to that person, like if your husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, sister, brother, and you live in the same household, you share emotional bonds. And the closer the emotional bond to somebody, the more the bioresonance. And so it's a form of bioresonance. And a good example of that is, I've used this analogy before, but when a bunch of women who are, of menstrual age are living together in one household, and when they live together for a while, their periods start becoming, they all start menstruating at the same time. They align, and that's a form of bioresonance. You're not passing anything. It's not a form of contagion. So you don't pass anything from one person to another. There's nothing called shedding. It's total garbage. I mean, this whole process of shedding does not exist, folks. I'm speaking in very scientific terms here. You don't shed anything. If that was the case, I should be dead. I go around vaccinated people all the time. I worked in a lab for 6 months with COVID samples. There was almost no ventilation in the lab. I should have been dead too if a deadly virus existed. So no, this is not possible. And biology doesn't work that way. You have to look at this very logically. What is working very well, and the cabal has been very successful at doing, is fear mongering. They work through fear, and fear does amazing things to the body. Fear is a form of massive amounts of stress. So you got, the adrenals are pumping out cortisol and all sorts of stuff. And it completely destroys your body on the inside. You get inflamed, you get upset, you get anxiety. And, fear does weird things. So that's what's happening. And people are fearful. Oh my God, that person is going to shed on me. And that's it. They get fear. And then, you start manifesting stuff in your head.
Of fluids that people are always experiencing different exchanges on a biological level as well. And I think that has to be addressed, right? And there's so many questions for you. And I'm just, we just have to have you back on if you can. I know you will have your private time, but we also have the questions about spike proteins and so on.
Well, I'd like to quickly say something.
Yes, please. Yes.
People can put their minds to rest. There is no spike protein. There never has been a spike protein. Okay. This whole spike protein thing is just all fear mongering. That they just made an in silico computer genome. They put a bunch of HIV spike proteins in the genome on the computer, and then they sent it out to everybody. And they said, "Oh, look, a novel virus." You know what a novel is? You write a novel, which is fiction. That's what they did. That's a novel. There is no virus out there. Okay. It was all made up on the computer. The real thing are the jabs. The jab is a chemical cocktail with no spike protein, no mRNA in it, every single jab. And we've tested 2,305 vials. 18 scientists have actually tested that many vials. All these people are all over the world. I personally have tested 154 vials in the chemistry lab that I'm working with this analytical chemist. There is not a single piece of mRNA or spike protein in any of these things. So it's a straight out chemical cocktail. That's all it is. Heavy metals, hydrogel, reduced graphene oxide, and that lipid nano. That lipid nano is very deadly also. It's very toxic, and it causes anaphylaxis and inflammation. So people, please don't worry about spike proteins. There are no spike proteins out there. There's no spike proteins in the jabs. There's no virus, and there's no spike proteins in the virus either, because the virus doesn't exist. And all our biology, the way we know it, is incorrect. Okay, we have to go now, moving forward into the golden age of discovery. We have to find what is real biology. Does DNA exist? Does mRNA exist? I'm actually asking these questions because to me, these are very important questions. What were we told about DNA? What were we told about RNA? A bunch of scientists just made up stuff and wrote a bunch of papers, and nobody ever questioned it. Nobody questioned people like Dr. Sidney Brenner, the Cavendish labs in the University of Cambridge. Nobody questioned Watson and Crick. Have we actually, does DNA exist the way we're told it exists? So all these things we really need to look at it scientifically, and we need some serious scientific inquiry into biology, the way we've been taught biology. And I think most of biology, in my opinion, is completely wrong. About 95 to 96% of it. I know these are radical statements to make, but
yes, they are. But good, we are here to stir up the pot, right, people? And we know that we did tell you that it's going to be controversial and be new information coming in for you to digest. And if you wouldn't mind staying, Poornima,
sure.
We thought of making creating a panel with you and Dr. Rainer Füllmich after, if you don't mind. Sure. And if I may go on to the next controversial subject, and if I may introduce you, welcome, Dr. Rainer Füllmich, and
thank you.
Thank you, Poornima. And Dr. Rainer, thank you so much for being here with us. We know you have a busy schedule with Nuremberg 2.0 and so on. And and we're looking forward to an update. May I introduce you formally, or would you prefer to do it yourself?
Oh, go ahead, please. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you again. Thank you. We are really grateful for your presence. So,
and and I need to be connected so that we can hear Poornima on the Corona Investigative Committee, because that is really important information. I want to look into this.
Yes, indeed. And we were just feeling that collaboration with you and her. Definitely we'll do the connection. And we're just honoring your work with the collaborative work of what you're doing there. So as a formality, I'd like to introduce Dr. Rainer Füllmich, who's a trial lawyer specializing in banking and stock exchange law, private international law, and medical law. In July 2020, Dr. Rainer Füllmich, together with Viviane Fischer, founded the Corona Investigative Committee, which he just spoke about, which has since interviewed over 400 experts, specialists, scientists, medical professionals, activists, and also those affected by the corona measures in weekly hearings that are broadcasted live online. Since December 2021, Dr. Rainer Füllmich has been elected chairman of the board in the dual leadership of the Measure Critical and Grassroots Democratic Party, the Basis. Dr. Füllmich is also a founding member of the interest group ARDUR, Action Démocratique Utrecht, which introduces, amongst other things, a sanction-protected right of proof regarding discovery into civil procedural law for the purpose of creating equality in David versus Goliath legal disputes due to the involvement of large corporations or state bodies, resulting in genuine class action lawsuits in its purest sense. Dr. Füllmich was born and raised in Bremen, Germany, and attended school in Bremen and Farmington Hills, Michigan. He studied law at the 21August University in Göttingen and in Los Angeles. Amongst other things, he worked as a research assistant at the law faculty of the 21August University of Göttingen, where he received his doctorate. Prior to founding his law firm in 1993, Dr. Füllmich worked in corporate banking for Deutsche Bank in Germany and Japan. And some of you might already know of his work against the Deutsche Bank and Volkswagen. Very formidable force to reckon with. And I'm so glad that he's on this bright side of the light with us. So Dr. Füllmich has published various articles and books in the fields of banking and law.
What is behind what we found out? And of course, most importantly, I will talk about what can we do now. As a lawyer, as you pointed out, my firm has always represented consumers and small and medium-sized businesses against large global corporations, all of which we found are just criminal organizations. When Corona happened and I became aware of it in March of 2020. Before that, I thought this is the flu season, nothing else. And then in March of 2020, when my wife and I were still living at the ranch in Northern California, all of a sudden we were getting these phone calls from our friends and relatives explaining about how bad it had gotten in Europe, and in particular in Germany. People were talking about lockdowns all of a sudden. I had never heard of that term before, except in a movie with Sly Stallone. Lockdown is a prison term, and it means when you have prison unrest, prison riots, that's when you have lockdowns, when people are afraid that things are getting out of control. Maybe the people who are behind this are afraid of just that. So when I finally decided that I couldn't just, stay at the ranch and sit things out, my wife kept talking to me and kept telling me, we've got to go home. We've got to do something. You know how to deal with these global corporations. And I said, well, it's safer here. But finally, we decided, okay, we're going to go back. And this is based on a phone call that I had with my good friend, Wolfgang Wodark, Dr. Wodark. He's the one who more or less single-handedly stopped the swine flu, which happened 12 years ago, and probably was their first major attempt at a real pandemic. That's when they changed the definition of what a pandemic is in order to make it possible to make any flu into a pandemic. And when Wolfgang told me about what happened then and how it eventually was exposed that pandemic wasn't a pandemic, but just a mild flu, but still people had gotten badly hurt because of the shots, because of the vaccines, which were even then used. I decided, and when he told me this is much worse than their first attempt, this is a global thing, this is so pervasive, we don't really know what's behind this, but we've got to do something. So I decided that I would go back, but I asked him that I needed help. And my own law firm, there were 17 lawyers back then. Now we're down to 3 because of Corona. Not that they died, but they didn't want anything to do with this. So he put me in touch with Vivian Fisher, who had written a petition, which had been signed by 85,000 Germans, asking for a baseline study because she wanted to know what is really going on here. Since we didn't get any answers from what we thought our politicians or our mainstream media, we decided maybe we're going to have to do this ourselves. So I finally went to Berlin, met with Vivian, and I decided we're going to have a conference, maybe 2-week conference or something. Then when our politicians would finally understand that they have been mistaken, they would all apologize and we'll go back to normal. Well, that didn't happen. And right from the start, Vivian and Wolfgang said, no, this is much worse. We're going to have to do what the German Bundestag should have done. We're going to have to set up an investigative committee. And that's what we did. And the 3 major questions that we wanted answers to is, 1, how dangerous is the virus really? And the short answer is, it's no more dangerous than the common flu. Many people say it probably is the common flu because the so-called coronavirus is not as novel as they claim it is. It's contained in pretty much every common flu and every major cold. The survival rate is 99.97%, I believe, or put in another way, the infection fatality rate is between 0.14 and 0.15. Well, lately, I think Professor John Ioannidis of Stanford University says it's 0.2%, but that's still in line with the fatality rate or the mortality of the flu. So that was very quickly found out. The big question is, why all these measures if this is no more dangerous than the common flu? Well, because of the PCR test. Then the next question was, how reliable is the PCR test? And it was just by coincidence that one day I was riding the subway in Berlin with Wolfgang Wodark, and he told me, while he was getting off the car, he told me, you know that the PCR test cannot tell you anything about infections. I pulled him back in and I said, no, I don't, but you have to explain this to me. And then he did. He said, we're going to need experts. We're going to need people who will testify to that. So we spoke with Professor Ulrike Kämmerer. She's a biologist from Würzburg University. And then we got a phone call from someone who's now a really good friend of mine. It's Dr. Mike Eden, formerly of Pfizer. He's a former vice president and chief science officer of Pfizer. And he told me the same thing. And there's another professor, a retired professor from the Netherlands, Professor Capel, who told me the same thing. And then there's Dolores Cahill and many, many, many others. So we decided to take a deep dive into the PCR test. And to make a long story very short, because most of you probably know this already, no matter how you apply the PCR test, it can never, ever tell you anything about infections. And that's basically for 2 reasons. One is it cannot distinguish between dead and live matter. So if you test positive, it is highly likely that you test positive because the PCR test finds fragments of your body's immune system's fight against the common cold or the flu, which may have happened 4 or 5 months ago. This is not live. This is not dangerous. It will not infect anyone. The second reason, there are many more reasons, but these are the 2 reasons that are, whatever the machine finds is only a fragment of a virus or a sequence, but it never, ever finds a whole virus. For these 2 reasons, basically, it is totally impossible for this test to tell you anything about infections. And that's what a case should be, an infection, not just a positive test result. Then comes a very strange thing, because we looked at who is responsible for these tests. And it turns out it's the World Health Organization but they had help. They used the same person who 12 years ago played a similar role and should have lost all credibility during the swine flu, and that's Professor Dr. Drosten of Charité University. He's the one who wrote the first protocol, who wrote a paper in which he explained that he has found a PCR test, invented a PCR test, through which it will be possible to tell if someone is infected or not with COVID. Now, this man, it turns out, is a liar. He is neither a real professor. His professorship was awarded to him by one of the richest German families, the Quandt family. You probably don't know them, but they own, among other things, BMW. Then two investigators, scientists, looked into his background, because when it turned out this man is the most important medical advisor to the government, plus the one who invented the PCR test, which was then recommended to the entire world as the gold standard for testing for COVID infections, they decided we need to know who this person is. And it turns out he claims to have written his doctoral dissertation in 2003. Well, if that were true, his dissertation should have been listed with the German National Library, but it wasn't. It couldn't be found anywhere in June of 2020 when people looked into his background. And to make another long story really short, this man is a fake. His test is a fake as well. And when they asked him to deliver this test, he did that. And he used it in such a way, apart from the fact that it cannot be, it can't, under no circumstances can it tell you anything about infections. He used it in such a way, he misused it in such a way so that it was guaranteed to produce false positives. How did he do this? Well, again, there are many things that he made mistakes with. But the one thing that everyone understands is that he used, or everyone agrees that at 24 cycles of amplification, you put the whatever's in the swabs, you put it into a machine, and then it's being magnified or copied 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, et cetera, et cetera. And everyone agrees that at 24 cycles of amplifications, that's where the story should end, because it finds everything or nothing. It becomes totally unscientific. Even the New York Times agrees with this. At 35 cycles of amplification, this is what Dr. Mike Yeadon first told us, you end up with at least 94% false positives. Now, his test, and accordingly all the other tests which used his test as a blueprint, because this was recommended by the World Health Organization as the gold standard for testing for COVID infections, was set at 45 cycles of amplification. Well, the third question that we wanted, so all of a sudden we realized this is a fake, this is a hoax. And then it turns out fake, the word fake, it sounds familiar. Well, the word fake reappears in the acronym of a public health emergency of international concern. Public health emergency of international concern. And that is what they wanted to be able to declare. That's what they needed the tests for. That's what they needed the cases for, because they want, I'll explain who they is, they wanted to declare a public health emergency of international concern. What did they need that for? Well, you need this in order to use untested new drugs on humans. And this is what happened with the so-called vaccines, which, as we all know now, are not vaccines at all. In early 2020, in January of 2020, there were no cases. But they were under a lot of pressure to get this agenda rolled out. But without any cases, they wouldn't be able to declare a public health emergency of international concern, whose acronym is PHEIC, and that is pronounced fake. It's in your face. They're laughing at us. Since there were no cases, they turned to Drosten, and he obliged delivering his test. And on top of that, he delivered another lie, which is there are asymptomatic infections. What is that good for? Well, it makes everyone afraid of everyone, because even though you may be looking perfectly healthy and you have no symptoms, that's why it's called asymptomatic, you could potentially be really dangerous. You could be contagious for others. That's what that implies. This is a lie. With respiratory diseases, there's no such thing as asymptomatic infections. One of the more or better known studies that was conducted was in October, I believe, of 2020 in Wuhan, of all places. 10 million subjects participated, and it turns out there is no such thing as asymptomatic infections. We now do have asymptomatic problems with those people who received the vaccines and whose immune system is badly damaged or completely shut off. Many of them don't know this. They feel perfectly well. That's why one of the scientists who we spoke with said they are asymptomatic because come fall, they will fall victim to any, more or less negligible disease because their immune system will not function as good as it should function anymore. Maybe it doesn't function at all. So that's what it was all needed for. They wanted to roll out their agenda. They didn't have any cases. They needed the cases implying infections in order to be able to declare the public health emergency of international concern, the fake. And they needed theirs, including politicians, active ones, and politicians who have retired, including economists like the former Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development of the United States, Catherine Austin Fitts, who also happens to be a former investment banker. So those are the facts. Now, the big question is, what is this all about? Why are they doing this? And who is they? Well, it turns out that it was no coincidence that our politicians wouldn't give us any answers to these questions. That's why we had to find out ourselves. It's not just us, the Corona Investigative Committee, it's others as well. It's Del Bigtree, it's CHD in the United States, it's many other entities all over the world. That's why we had to do this ourselves. And it turns out our politicians are not our politicians anymore. And this has to do with the World Economic Forum, which is behind all of this. The people who are behind the World Economic Forum, of course, are interesting. I think we'll find out more and more. Some of the people who are with it are already well known. One is, of course, Klaus Schwab. The other one is Bill Gates. Then there's very, very close ties with the World Health Organization. And now since 2019, they have more or less taken over the United Nations as well. So those are the people who are behind this. Then there's the usual suspects, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, many, many more. We found this out because we also spoke to historians, to geopoliticians, because after we found out this, there is no such thing. There is no pandemic. This is a big hoax. We wanted to know why and what is this about and who's behind this. Now, if you and the shocking answer we got is eugenics is a big driver behind this. Eugenics. It's a Greek word. Eu is good, and genesis. You want to produce better people. That's what's behind this. Who first came up with this idea? Well, this is ascribed to Charles Darwin and his research in the 1850s or so, and he's the one who coined the term, or who accepted the term of survival of the fittest. Then, in 1906. Based on those beginnings, the very same people who were dealing with, or their predecessors, the usual suspects, as I said, founded the British Eugenics Society. In, I think, 1917 or so, its American counterpart was founded, the American Eugenics Society. And then came World War II, which was, as we know, found out, and most people probably know it in the meantime, which was funded on both sides by Anglo-American oligarchs, the Anglo-American financial mafia. Again, eugenics popped up right after World War II, when UNESCO was founded by Julian Huxley, who is the brother of the man who wrote Brave New World. And and he happens to be a former president of the British Eugenics Society. And in his introductory speech, he said as much as, eugenics has been given a bad word because of Hitler, of course, because of Hitler, of course, but we will soon be able to talk about it openly again. That's where it reappeared all of a sudden in public. Soon after, or a few years after, in 2000, the first major, I guess you could call it a military maneuver or exercise, which was called Operation Dark Winter, was conducted. It was a rehearsal for what we're seeing right now. It dealt with how a dangerous virus was threatening the United States and how to respond to it. The second such exercise was Operation Lockstep, conducted by the Rockefeller Foundation. And the third one, most people are aware of this, is Event 201, which is really Event 21. The O in the middle is symbolizes the Earth, the planet Earth. That was in, I believe, October or September of 2019. Again, the usual suspects conducted it. So that's what's driving this. It's the idea of eugenics. It's people who believe that they are the elite, who consider us no more important than cattle. I'm not joking. This is what we were told by these experts, by these historians and geopoliticians. They are bent on gaining full and complete control over all of us. That means two things. One, population reduction. That's what these so-called vaccines are about. And two, gaining control over those who survive this. And that's what they're experimenting with right now. That's what these so-called vaccines are all about. But more and more people are waking up to this, and more people are realizing that something needs to be done. Why am I saying our politicians are not our politicians? Well, the World Economic Forum, which I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, was founded by the man who I also mentioned, Klaus Schwab. But that's only part of the story. This Klaus Schwab, whose father tried to help Hitler invent the nuclear bomb and failed. Klaus Schwab tried to do the same thing with respect to Europe. Up until then, it was all about nuclear deterrence, keep everyone in a panic mode because the Russians are coming. We need more rockets. We need to defend ourselves. We know this is a blatant lie, but that's what their policy was back then. Then they changed it to, we have to influence European politics. And that's how they used Klaus Schwab to found the World Economic Forum in 1971. In 1992, they set up their Global Young Leaders Program. They started to produce the politicians which we were supposed to vote into office. Almost no one who was voted into office did not come from this politician production facility. Among the first two to graduate were Angela Merkel and Bill Gates. Then came people like Tony Blair, former Prime Minister of the UK. Then came Jose Aznar, who's a former Prime Minister of Spain, and almost all of the people who are currently running the show, or seem to be running the shows. It's other people who are pulling their strings, of course. Those people are behind this. But pretty much all of the national leaders who we're dealing with in Western Europe have gone through this Global Young Leaders Program, including Emmanuel Macron from France, including Chancellor Kurz, who, of course, had to leave office, including the person who runs the European Union. Her name is Ursula von der Leyen, including our Secretary of State, Frau Baerbock is her name, but also Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand, or most prominently, of course, Justin Trudeau of Canada. In fact, this is no secret. Klaus Schwab runs around and boasts in public that the World Economic Forum has infiltrated half the Canadian Parliament. So that is what we're dealing with. These are not our politicians who are making mistakes, who are being stupid. Of course they're stupid. Most of them have a fake biography, just like this Professor Dr. Drosten, who I just mentioned. No, but they're easy to handle. That's why they were put into these positions. They're basically fall guys, because in the fall, actually, no pun intended, in the fall, when things are supposedly going to get a whole lot worse here in Germany and in Western Europe, they're going to reintroduce mask mandates, probably vaccine mandates, lockdowns, etc. In the fall, this is what's supposed to happen. All of these national leaders, in particular in Western Europe, which is the testing ground, we believe, for what is happening for the entire world, all of these national leaders, including our new chancellor, who is involved in every economic crime imaginable that was committed over the past 10 years, they will all be kicked out of office, or their governments will implode, signaling to the people, these people are incapable, these leaders are incapable, we need a real leader, and that can only be done under the EU. We're going to need Ursula von der Leyen. She's going to take over, and that's going to be the first mini world government, we believe. Then afterwards, they're going to, if that works well, they're going to try and introduce a real world government under the UN. So that's what's going to happen, or that's what they will try to make happen. We don't know if it's really going to happen. All of the other things that supposedly will happen over the next, I don't know, decade or so, transhumanism, all that stuff is probably complete bullshit. It cannot work. This is what some of the experts that we spoke with told us in great detail. It cannot work, but they're trying. And what they're also trying is they're trying to keep people in panic mode. Now that more and more people are waking up to the fact that there are a few things not quite right about Corona, about this pandemic. Another possibility is that in the fall, they're going to try and make the Ukraine war spill over into Europe to keep people in panic mode. We don't know if that's going to happen, but that is part of the agenda. What can be done about this? Well, we believe that the entire system is so corrupt, it is irreparable. You can't. I think there's nothing we can do about it. Look at every little segment, or even large, at the most important segments of that political or allegedly democratic system that we're living in. Look at medicine, totally corrupted. There's nothing you can do to save it, that system. Look at the judiciary in Germany. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years now, and I can see that the judiciary is totally corrupted. There are a few good men and women out there. I'm not saying that there's no exception to this rule, but it's basically totally corrupted. Here's a case in point. Tested, PCR tested. They have to wear masks. They can't play with their friends. They can't sleep at night. They wake up in the middle of the night yelling and screaming. They don't want to go to school anymore. They have stomach aches. You've got to do something. So the judge did what he's supposed to do, and he called upon three renowned professors from renowned universities here in Germany. One of them is an expert in PCR testing. It's the aforementioned Professor Ulrike Kämmerer. Another one is an expert in child psychology, and the third one is an expert in maths. Based on their expert testimony, he said, there is no factual basis for any of the measures. Therefore, there's no legal basis. You must stop immediately. 3 weeks later, his home, his car, and his office were searched. His cell phone and his computer were seized. Same thing happened to the three experts. Same thing happened to the lawyer who represented the interests of the two children, 7 and 9 years old. Same thing happened to a friend of the judges, a comedian, simply because she was a friend of the judges. Now, this did not scare the judge. He knew what he was getting himself into, but the message was directed at the entire judiciary. If you're not in line with the government, this is what's going to happen to you. And ever since, the government or the judiciary has been in line. So we have medicine totally corrupted. We have the judiciary totally corrupted. We have politics totally corrupted. We have economics, well, same thing. And we have education, totally corrupted. I know this much because my wife's a teacher and she left the system because she just couldn't take it anymore. So what can we do? Don't waste your time trying to fix the system, trying to teach those politicians what's really going on. It's a waste of time. What we should do is focus on setting up a new system, this time a real democratic system. By setting up, this is about grassroots democracy, setting up all these little totally independent, self-sufficient communities in our regions, because this is where people know best what's good for them in our regions. We don't need any global corporation or global NGO. They're all controlled by the same evil people. We don't need anyone from far away to tell us what's good for us and what isn't. We can set up our own healthcare system, our own judiciary, our own system of education, and our own system of economics. We know what's best for us. And the good thing is it's happening everywhere, in Germany, in the United States, in Latin America, in India. It's happening all over the world in many, many places. These little communities, they're already connecting with each other, and that's what makes them very powerful. And the next step will then be, and that's why I'm going to return to the United States, will then be to file a real complaint for damages, which hopefully will be accepted and certified to go forward as a class action. Why am I saying the United States? Well, there's other places in this world, India, for example, where the judiciary is still independent. But the United States, their system has three advantages over the German system, for example. It has a real law of evidence called pre-trial discovery, which means that before the case goes to trial, both parties have to make all of the evidence, the documentary evidence, the witnesses available to the other party. No trial by ambush, which is happening all the time in Germany. So a real law of evidence, and if one of the parties decides to withhold evidence or even destroy evidence, that party may very well lose the case. The second advantage is it has class actions. We don't have that in Germany because the global corporations, lobbyists are so powerful that they have full control over all of our politicians. So class action, what is that? It's if you have many people who suffer damages because of the same, for the same reason. For example, 20 years ago, I represented a German woman who suffered damages because of defective breast implants. After a cancer operation, she received plastic surgery. Certify this complaint to go forward as a class action, decided I'm going to let it go forward as an open, that means international class action. Everyone, all the potential victims of this defective product were informed by the mainstream media, which worked pretty well back then. And everyone then they can opt in or out. If they want to decide, I want to do it all by myself, I have my own lawyer, that's good. But if they want to take advantage of the class action, then they can join that class. And then only one person, what is called a representative plaintiff who suffered typical damages, will go through with the complaint. If he wins, everyone else wins as well. This has major advantages. It's far cheaper, it's not as tedious, and it doesn't require hundreds of thousands, or in this case, probably billions of complaints to be filed. One is enough, or maybe several class actions. So that's the second major advantage, apart from the real law of evidence, class actions. And the third advantage is if you can show in a court of law that the other party, in this case, the CDC, Fauci, many of the doctors who will be held personally liable, many of the politicians, the mainstream media, if you can show that they acted with intent, there is no negligence here. This is intent. Remember the story about the PCR test. If you can show that they acted with intent, then we are walking directly into punitive damages territory, which means if, for example, someone whose business was destroyed because of the lockdown suffered damages in the amount of $100,000, he can ask for punitive damages to be awarded on top of this. And that can be 7 times, 10 times, 21 times the actual damages. And that is what we're going to need. And that's what we're going to use in order to take down these corporations whose wealth is a result of their having looted and plundered our public coffers, stolen our money, basically. So that is what we intend to do. I've been working on this for quite a while now. The first such attempt at a class action was in Canada, in Ontario. Our friend Michael Swinwood filed that complaint. He was thrown out. Of course, the case was dismissed as a querulous proceeding, they said. He didn't even get a hearing. One of my former students wrote the PCR test part in that complaint, so I know it's well written. Maybe it was too soon when he filed it. On appeal, he wrote an excellent appellate brief. On appeal, at least he did get a hearing. Again, it was dismissed. He left Canada and he's now in Peru, and I think he's never coming back. Second attempt was in South Africa, where we tried to, where we helped our South African colleagues file a complaint at the highest South African court, the Constitutional Court. However, it was not accepted. It took a lot of effort, a lot of money. Many of the experts whom we, as the Corona Investigative Committee, had interviewed were part of this. Dr. Mike Eden, Professor Ulrike Kemmerer, Dr. Wolfgang Wodark, many others. But we failed again. So maybe this is the right time. We believe this is the right time, because even the mainstream media are now talking about the side effects, the vaccine side effects. This is making a lot of people, even those who have gotten the shots, ask questions. And as you know, once you ask questions, there's no stopping them. So many more people will get to the bottom of this and will understand that this is about life and death. This is not about someone being negligent. This is about life and death. And once people understand that, they will remove their consent. There's this picture which many of you may have seen. It's about a wooden board, a plank that sits on, part of it sits on a mountaintop, and the other part is hovering over the abyss. And on that other part, there's one person yelling at 20 or 30 people who are standing on that other part. You will follow my orders or else. And then one of the people steps off the board and says, I do not consent. Now imagine if all of them got off of the board, then the one person who's yelling, who's standing over the abyss, well, where's he going to go? Straight to hell, I would say. So this is what we think is going to happen. And I think that, what their goal is, total control. And what can we do? Set up these independent, self-sufficient communities, let these global corporations and global NGOs play with themselves and go to hell. And we will continue with our legal efforts. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Reiner. It is so assuring to have you at the helm. So grateful for that, and for having done all that investigative legal work, which is necessary for us to sift through all the, different narratives that we've been listening to, and then all about different personalities and people, the organizations. And of course, we've been following your work very closely. It's always good to have an update from you, and also to feel our energy together and right behind you, and that we can all do this. And so it's very positive what you just said at the end, that we just have to keep going.
Yes.
Now, you might have, yes, thank you. You might have already answered this question with regards to working on the ground level, to create the new legal systems, which I think is very wise. And we have a question from Shabnam. We both know Shabnam Palesa Mohammed, who together with Rima Laibo and James Roguski was on our last webinar about the WHO Treaty. But this time she has a question for you, which we might have answered, but perhaps you can elaborate on it. Do you still believe in the model of representative democracy, as opposed to participatory ground-up democracy, where ethical and competent people serve?
Well, that's a really good question. I used to think that representative democracy is the best model, but I've changed my mind. That's why I joined that party. I didn't found it. I'm just one of the people who joined that party. Ground up grassroots democracy. That's what it's all about. There shouldn't be too many layers between the people and those who make the decisions. That's why grassroots democracy, which means the people are making their own decisions. That's why I think that is the best way to go. That's what democracy is really about. I believe that what this requires is that people understand that this is not as much about national sovereignty, but much more about individual sovereignty. We are all free, sovereign people. And once people understand that, and it's really hard for Germans to understand that, because they always look for someone to tell them what to do. They always ask, can I do this? That is not the question. That I think is at the basis of grassroots, of real democracy, that each and every one of us understand that we are all not just something, but something important, something unique, that we all have. Each and every one of us has special talents, but people don't know that, not in Germany. Once they understand that, they'll be able to stand at the helm themselves and not wait for someone else to tell them what to do.
Yes, indeed. And I'm going to follow this up with another question that has to do with Malaysia, perhaps. And let's see. Oh, yes. But I will go to this one first. Then about the WHO. There's a developing movement to withdraw nations from the WHO and the UN. Do you agree that withdrawing a nation from WHO and the UN will provide protection from the self-generated supranational powers the international health regulations, WHO, are gearing up to use in order to bring in the New World Order?
Absolutely. I agree with that. And I'm including NATO, including the European Union, because they're all run by the same people, by the same evil people. We don't need them. They need us, the so-called elites, which are really parasites.
Yes, parasites is a good term. We're starting to use that rather than elites. So here's a question. Do the politicians in each country consider themselves to be elites? And what's in it for them?
Well, if I look at Germany, France, Italy, the United States, they certainly do consider themselves elites. But if you take a closer, it used to be different. 30 years ago, I remember there are still some politicians who were concerned about their constituency. They were really trying to do something good for the people who voted them into office. But in the meantime, what we have in these countries is career politicians who have no other career than being a politician. Most of them, as I pointed out earlier, have fake biographies or no biographies. And that's why they're being chosen, because it's easier to pull someone's strings who, if he is exposed, loses everything, than to try and pull someone's strings who has a real life, who has a real academic background or whatever kind of background. So yes, they do consider themselves to be the elites. They're totally removed from reality. They are not in touch with the people. And that's what's going to be their downfall.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. So beyond the layers of collusion, corruption, is this egocentric viewpoints of themselves. And this also leads to the question of conflicts of interest, because they seem to be impervious to the fact that they are actually involved in a lot of conflicts of interest. For example, being paid off, by different elite, well-established families, or writing false biographies, and also getting paid off and investing in the business. For example, there was an Asian country that invested 250 million USD in Pfizer. This before that, and you know which country that is. And so how can there not be a question of conflict of interest?
Yeah, this is another really important aspect. It's corruption. That's what's at the heart of this. This corruption is pervasive. It's pretty much everywhere. I believe there is no global corporation that is not corrupt. I believe there's no global NGO that is not corrupt. If I look at Europe, you can see what happened here. All of these so-called vaccines, they got a conditional approval, which is similar to the emergency use authorization in the United States. In the United States, they got it from their public agencies, which are not really their public agencies anymore. They're totally corrupt, as we all know. EMA, the European Medical Agency, they did it on behalf of all the member states of the European Union. And the Commissioner of Health is a Greek woman whose name I can't remember, Kyriakides, something like that. She received $4 million from Pfizer. Nobody looked into that. And she really didn't make any decisions, I don't think, because the person who really made the decisions is the president of the European Union, which is the woman by the name of Ursula von der Leyen, a woman who failed at every single job she's ever held, and who left a trail of scandals behind her. One of these scandals involved when they were investigating her because she was our Secretary of Defense. They were investigating her in a financial scandal, and they asked her to produce her emails. She destroyed them all. Now she's not communicating by email anymore, but through text message. And there were, we know this through whistleblowers, there were a lot of text messages between her and what's his name, Albert Bourla, the chief executive officer of Pfizer. So that's the decision making that we can see. It's all corruption. And that is a very, very dangerous disease. That's why I'm saying we must disconnect from all of these entities and do our own thing in our regions.
Yes, indeed. It seems like it's like a shall we say, a boys' club, where they just support each other's falsehoods about themselves. And so you're saying that we create our own matrix, our own news systems, and coexisting with the old one, or how are we going to revamp the old system with all these people?
Great question. Yes, I think we're going to be coexisting with the old one, but there is no choice. We have to do it because it's definitely collapsing. Right now, it's collapsing. The monetary system is collapsing. Both the EU and the United States are so indebted, it is impossible to pay any of this back. I just learned very recently through a movie which is called America, From Freedom to Fascism. The director of the movie and the producer, I believe, is a man by the name of Aaron Russo, who died of cancer several years ago. Great movie. He's structure in general, but that's not the case. All of these things are being paid for through the state taxes, tobacco tax, gas tax, whatever kind of tax, maybe state income tax as well. The federal income tax, the only thing it pays for is interest for the bank loans given to the government. Again, we have the same players who are controlling the banks, the pharmaceutical industry, the food industry, everything through this financial mafia. So that's what federal income tax is being used for. And another interesting aside is what I learned through that movie, that 86 million or so Americans do not pay federal income tax. They know about this, and they cannot be taken to court for this because there is no statutory basis for it. And in fact, there are 4 Supreme Court decisions that explicitly say that the 16th Amendment of the Constitution, which many people think is enough of a legal basis, it does not give the federal government to the power to ask for federal income tax. So that's why I'm saying we must disconnect from all of this, because it's collapsing anyhow. Mm-hmm. And what they're trying to do is make it into a controlled collapse. I don't think they have control anymore, because too many of us have woken up. But it is going to collapse. They're trying to introduce not just a one world government, but because of the fact that the dollar and the euro is totally in debt, or euro area are totally indebted, they're also trying to introduce a one world digital currency, mm-hmm. Which is, of course, issued by one bank, their bank. That's why we need to disconnect. It's collapsing anyhow. It's evil. It's bad. It's done a lot of harm to all of us. But we're capable of setting up something brand new in our regions, independent, self-sufficient communities.
Yes, we're really deep diving now. We can go on for hours, especially with the financial system and how that feeds everything else, right? For people who do things for profit solely. And of course, we can talk about the digital currencies, cryptocurrencies as well, if you have a comment, a short one. And then we come back to what people can do for themselves on an individual basis. Would you like to comment on that?
On the digital currency, well, there is a very well-known American economist. His name is Martin Armstrong. For this coming fall or early next year, which is going to make the dollar rise one more time, but then that's going to collapse as well. And right after that, he expects the other side to try and introduce their digital currency. They're experimenting with this all over the world already in more or less remote areas. China and even Russia is participating in this. We still don't know if they're part of the agenda, but it's happening. But one of the experts who we spoke with, it's a German economist by the name of Ernst Wolf. He says they're not ready yet. So there's enough time for us to set up our new system, even our own currency, if that's what it takes. There is enough time. And as we heard earlier, much of what we're seeing is just a grand illusion. Their perceived omnipotency doesn't exist. It's just a big game of psychological terrorism concocted by psychologists and psychiatrists, sociologists, and others over probably the last couple of decades or so. But much of what we're seeing, I would say 95% of what we're seeing, is just a grand illusion. So we shouldn't allow them to put us in panic mode, but rather we should keep our cool and just go about our lives, try and connect with nature, turn off the mainstream media, public television, and enjoy life. That's what it's all about.
Oh my goodness, it's exactly what I was going to ask. Some really down-to-earth, common sense advice as well. And thank you so much for that. And there is an important question here that came through, and I have to ask you this specifically about Malaysia. Malaysia has a unified judicial system involving both federal and state laws, a legal system founded on British common law. What can we do as common people when our own legal system refuses to address the injuries and deaths caused by COVID-19 injections that are also being reported worldwide?
Well, that is the reason we have a similar situation here in Germany, as I explained earlier. Our system is unfortunately totally corrupt. Even those exceptions to the rule who would like to stand up to the other side and who are trying to uphold the rule of law, they cannot make themselves heard anymore, simply because there's all these repercussions. And because of that, right from the start, I mean, from my experience, I've been in this for 30 years. I'm a trial lawyer. I've interviewed, I don't know, probably 1,000 witnesses. But because of this, I realized right from the start that the only way out of this is not using our German legal system. I did file a few cases, but I'm using these cases and the courtroom appearances as stages in order to get the information across that the mainstream media otherwise would report on. But I have come to the conclusion that our best bet is the American legal system. Not just ours as German. And of course, it's not all good there. There are a lot of crazy people in the United States as well. In the bigger cities, you find more of them than in the rural parts of the country. But there's still some parts of the judiciary that function. For example, on April 18th, I believe, a decision came down by a federal judge in Florida, which said the government, in that case the CDC, does not have the power to issue mask mandates. And unlike in Europe and in Turkey, where we have four decisions that state explicitly and in great detail that PCR testing with the passengers, and people took it seriously. The government doesn't dare ignore such a decision. One of the reasons may be that the people in the United States are armed. There is the Second Amendment. I changed my mind about that when I learned that the reason why they included the Second Amendment to the Constitution is not that they wanted to be able to do school shootings. No. Most Americans come from Europe, from countries where they were either for political or religious reasons persecuted. That's why they put that into their constitution, because they said, "Ooh, if this ever happens again, we're going to have to be able to defend ourselves." That makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm. And likewise, too, the federal judge, a federal court judge who insisted that the Pfizer research papers be released, the 55,000. I mean, that was an important move. We have to remember his name. Do you know his name?
No, I forget his name, but I
think he's a hero as well. And then,
absolutely. And that's what I'm saying. If this goes well, if we do manage to get our complaint for damages, which will be based on vaccine damages, because this is also of emotional importance. If this goes well and the case is certified to go forward as an open, meaning an international class action, then anyone can join this class. And that there's probably going to be more than just one class action. It's going to take a lot of work, but just the other day, I met with a group of 240 German doctors. One of them was so distraught, and she said, "Oh, you can't do anything in these courts here." I said, "Yes, you can. Not in the German courts, but in the U.S. And also, even though I'm not, by the way, at the helm of this. Some people think I am, but it's only local communities are connecting with each other. That's what gives them the strength. But that is the big light at the end of the tunnel that I can point to when people in Malaysia are worried that their judiciary doesn't work. Well, there is one judiciary where we still believe that it can work. And even if it doesn't, then we're going to go outside of the system and do it on our own. But we do need legitimacy for that, because if a court decides that the global corporations like BlackRock, Pfizer, and all the others are going to be held accountable and are going to have to pay damages, which will amount to taking them down, basically, because damage is so big. If such a court decides that, then it has to have the authority to enforce that decision. In order for that authority to exist, you need support by the people. That's why we're counting on these local communities to support us, to back us, first in the United States, but also in all of the other countries.
So if I understand clearly, that we can participate in these class action lawsuits as well.
Yes, if it gets certified to go forward as an open, meaning international class action, even if we're just working on it and talking about it, it's empowerment. But I'm very absolutely certain that it's going to go well in the end. We have to keep fighting. whichever
Yes,
way is
on
possible.
the
And
light.
this is one of the better ways, because there is evidence to the fact that this may very well work well for us.
Yes, and on that note, it's high note of hope and action. Everybody action oriented. We've got to get moving, get spiraling on this. And so I thank you so very much. And if you don't mind staying for a little bit longer with Poornima and who you want to connect with, yes, thank you. I'm just so elated from this conversation. And would the tech team like to bring Poornima back on so they can have a nice starting of a collaboration as well? And she has such amazing information, doesn't she, Dr. Reiner?
All it takes is her email address, and I'll get in touch with her, and we'll arrange for an interview on the Corona Investigative Committee.
Right,
because I
we'll
know that everyone wants to know what she has to say.
Indeed. Well, perhaps just a quick roundup with both of you at this time and see what the final questions that you may have. Everyone, there's so many questions that have just come in, just flooded. And Poornima, are you on? Let's see. Here she is.
Yes, she is.
And she's in California. She's in Santa Barbara.
Excellent. We can meet in person very soon.
Yes. Are you muted, Poornima? Would you please kindly unmute yourself?
Okay. How about now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, great. I just want to let people know it's really important not to comply at all. And I'll give you an example. I'm not trying to glorify anything. In January of 2021, I went shopping. I go to a place called Montecito, which is right next door, where pretty much all the so-called parasites, a lot of them live there. So the world elite live in Montecito. All of Hollywood lives there, and Meghan and Harry and the entire detritus of humanity lives there. Okay. So anyway, I was shopping at Vaughn's, which is a grocery store, and I was not wearing a mask. I have never worn a mask ever. I didn't wear a mask in the lab when I was doing anything. I have never taken a PCR test at all. And the PCR test is not a test. The PCR is a technique. I don't know why we call it a test. It's not a test.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the thing is, when I went there, there's some people, nobody in the store, the employees weren't complaining that I wasn't wearing a mask. The people over there shopping, there's 2 or 3 people complaining that I was not wearing a mask. And they asked me to wear a mask, the people who were following me around from one aisle to another. And I said, just leave me alone. Keep 6 feet distance, please. Mind your own damn business. Don't come anywhere close to me. And just you do what you have to do. And then they kept harassing me, and they called the police. Now, Montecito is within the county. It's not part of Santa Barbara City. So it's under the sheriff's department. They ended up calling the sheriff's department. 3 squad cars show up. 6 police officers come into the store, and they find me, and they said, hey, you need to go with us. I said, no, I'm not going anywhere with you. I'm shopping. I haven't finished my shopping yet. Well, you need to wear a mask. I said, I'm not going to wear a mask. I'm not going to do anything. So one of the police officers, I think it was the sheriff's deputy, he says, ma'am, we don't want to talk here. Can you please come outside? I said, no, I'm not coming outside. He says, all right, can we talk about this peacefully? I said, fine, talk to me here. I don't need to go outside the store. And he says, okay, let's make this very simple. Can I put cuffs on you? I said, no, you can't put anything. If you put cuffs on me, I'm going to sue you, because that's assault. Okay. You don't touch my body at all. And they finally, after 20 minutes of this back and forth, I said, all right, I'll tell you what, let's talk outside. So I went outside with them, and we were outside in the parking lot. It was like a clown show. And this went on for 50 minutes, almost an hour. And they said, well, you need to wear a mask and you need to do this. I said, show me the law where I have to wear a mask. This is a mandate. I need to see this in California statutes. Do you have it in writing? In the statutes, on the books. It has to come through the state legislature and then essentially it has to be a law signed by the governor. Do you have a law on the books? A mandate is a mandate. That's not a law. And they said, no. I said, fine. Then you have no leg to stand on, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to shop. And they wrote me a ticket for $400 or something. And I said, listen, I'm not going to pay this. And if you send it to me in the mail, I'm just going to tear it. So they said, well, you'll have to come to us to the station. I said, I'm not going anywhere. And again, if you touch me, it's assault and I will sue you. And this finally ended up being where they finally just let me go. After a whole hour of hanging around over there doing nothing. My point is, stop wearing a mask, stop complying. You know, if I can do it, anybody can do it. I'm not anything special. You just have to say no. You must not comply to anything. And that it's not just the mask, it's the PCRs. If they're forcing you to take a vaccine, don't work, go find another job. Why do you need to stay there? I mean, this is very simple. You know, there's no white hats, blue hats, pink hats. Nobody's going to come to save us. We have to do this one person at a time. You need to save yourself. Each person needs to save themselves. There's no government entity, no president, no prime minister who's going to come and save us because they're all corrupt. Every single one is corrupt. You have to do this one person at a time. We're almost 8 billion people on this planet. There are 2,500 people there, the parasites, like you said. There's just a few of them. I mean, we outnumber these people by millions. All we have to do is en masse is just say no. Do not comply to any of their stuff. And Reiner is absolutely right. They're falling apart. Their system is falling apart. We just go on our own and do our own thing. You know, and the biggest thing is do not fear. You cannot live in fear. The moment you live in fear, you lose the battle. You just live your life and you move on and you do your own thing. And like Reiner also said, go into nature, enjoy your life, do your thing, be happy. And don't live in fear, please. Fear will destroy your life of any kind. It'll cause panic, it'll cause anxiety, and you'll get sick. So that's all I can say.
And also, we both think that this what happened is has benefits. It's an important time in history that it has been prophesied in many traditions. And so those of us who are prepared, I'm sometimes not so prepared, right? We are still taken aback by this. And but we are prepared to create a new world, not the order part, but the new world. And through a golden matrix of ideas and visions and light, bringing that reality into manifestation. And so I would like to invite both of you to give your vision for the future so that we can ground it, all of us, with the community that is watching, and also create this reality together. So Poornima, you have already ended in a very top note. And Dr. Reiner, perhaps you would like to say something, and you already have, but just another little snippet of your wisdom and how we can act and be.
Well, there's not much I can add to what Poornima says. I agree with everything she says. One thing, maybe the issue of spirituality. I am not a religious person. I've said this over and over again, but that has to do with the fact that I don't believe in organized religion. I think that's all about power, and that's why I'm not going to join any of that. But I do believe, this is basically due to my wife's teaching me, I'm a rational lawyer, I've never thought about these things, but I now believe, and I keep telling, if somebody had told me what I know now 2.5 years ago, I would have told them to go take their pills and go see a good doctor and they would be well. But in the meantime, we're running out of conspiracy theories. But I also understand now that, of course, there is a higher power out there. You don't have to be religious for that, but you have to know that we're just little parts of this whole universe. And I have never thought about it this way, but now I do know that that is the truth. And my good friend, Professor Dr. Martin Schwab, not related to the evil one, he is the best lawyer I know in this country, and one of the few who's standing up to authority. And he says, and he's religious, he's a Christian, and he says, Reiner, ultimately, what we as lawyers are going to have to do is sweep up the remainders of whatever is left, because all of the big stuff is what the big boss is going to take care of. He's talking about God. I kind of tend to look at it the same way. I do believe that once we rise up, that higher power will come to our aid. There's no doubt in my mind whatsoever. And that's why we can't lose.
Beautiful. And that cocooning that we had to do, I call it cocooning rather than a lockdown, because it's a matter of a mindset, right? We had an opportunity to grow. And of course, many people also left the planet, but also to show us, the ephemeral quality of life and how fragile we feel the rightness of the situation. And of course, in life, there are always polarities. We just try to stay in the center, and there's always chaos. There's always trouble and problems. It's how we deal with it. And I think we are dealing with it really quite well. And then certainly we're going to continue to deal with this growth, this evolution, and as a collective to go. And so it seems that we have a finite Earth time, and perhaps it's time to say adieu right now, just for now, and then we can come back on again. And everybody's here as a group, and then we are all connected with different networks of souls and people around the world, and we keep connecting because there's a really an uprising of humanity for the light, beyond the light side. And so I want to thank both of you so very much for being with us today, and for everybody out there. And I would like to say that for those of us who've been asking questions about how to detox, we actually have a program for you, the webinars coming up on 25th of September, and that's a detox protocols for COVID-19. And on 30th October, we are going to address the EMR, EMF, Siaran chemical traits, and 5G, 6G, and all the other Gs, 3Gs as well. And 16th of October, there's an integrated health and detoxification with natural remedies. So, that's the next step. And we are taking steps to take care of ourselves and to take care of each other, our loved ones, the families, communities, and the planet. And we also want to bring in the importance of going back to the land and farming and so on, and go out to nature as much as we can, because we're resonating at 7.83 hertz. It's a little bit of quantum frequency information that we can take care of ourselves this way, go into the sunlight to really absorb the D3, and also sing and dance and love each other and take care of each other, right? So I would like to also, invite, all of you that the registration will be open for the webinar series to be, for you to receive notification immediately. And so you can forward the links ahead to others, the same way you have registered today. And then let's just spread the love and spread the information and have people come into the fold, embrace all there is. And we want to send the love also and send the light to the parasites and to all of them, and shine the light on them, because they have a right also to exist and in the darkness and lightness of things. So we want to say thank you to everybody and to the tech team, GPMC, PPIM, and MAFIM for curating this, and all the people behind the scenes who have made the arrangements as well. So any questions, please come online again and send us all that. Thank you again, Poornima. I know you just wanted to be called Poornima.
And good to meet you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, everyone who's on this Zoom call. Everyone. This is a perfect connection of human beings.
Yes, and we will continue to do so. And please stay on for the 30 minutes of videos that our team has put together for you, just for those who would like to continue the edification and deepening of this information coming through.
HHS dropped a data bomb, and you missed it. You think Joe's got a bum brain? Look at what he's been doing with that bum brain. On January 21st, 2022, the FDA authorized remdesivir for children as small as 8 pounds. Did you catch that?
For children as small as 8 pounds. Did you catch that? Or did you miss it? We're talking about authorizing the Pfizer shot, 3 of them, for kids as young as 2 years old. On Wednesday, February the 2nd, the pandemic ends because HHS won't be counting COVID deaths anymore. Yeah, that's right. Every hospital is going to be counting kids in hospitals, kids in ICUs, and kids with COVID. What's up with the kids? Joe's going to give his State of the Union address on March the 1st. Funny thing, that's the same day that the national emergency expires. Think he's going to renew for a 3rd year, or you think something else is going to go down?
Shall I get out of the webinar?
Yes, you can.
Okay, thanks.
Or did you miss it? Now they're talking about authorizing a Pfizer shot, 3 of them, for kids as young as 2 years old. On Wednesday, February the 2nd, the pandemic ends because HHS won't be counting COVID deaths anymore. Yeah, that's right. Every hospital is going to be counting kids in hospitals, kids in ICUs, and kids with COVID. What's up with the kids? Joe's going to give his State of the Union address on March the 1st. Funny thing, that's the same day that the national emergency expires. Think he's going to renew for a 3rd year, or you think something else is going to go down?
New vaccines and treatments emerge, but one thing is still unchanged. This man, Dr. Tedros, soon to be re-elected as the chief of the World Health Organization.
And so as the death and disease and annihilation accelerates, as people have horrible autoimmune responses now to regular coronaviruses that are one of the most common out there, they're going to say you're dying of new versions of COVID-19, which is the autoimmune response that these vaccines are going to cause.
Welcome to tonight's edition of Lies You Can Trust. Our top story, monkeypox is set to take over the planet.
British health officials have detected another 104 cases of monkeypox in England in what has become the biggest outbreak beyond Africa of the normally rare disease.
The European Commission's Health Emergency and Response Authority has secured a contract with the company Bavarian Nordic to purchase almost 110,000 vaccine doses to address the current monkeypox outbreak.
Aujourd'hui, je suis venu me faire vacciner parce qu'on se rend compte que ça prend quand même pas mal d'ampleur. Fait que je préfère être vigilant parce que ça reste apparemment assez contagieux de ce que j'ai pu entendre.
It'll take probably about $1 billion a year for a pandemic task force at the WHO level, which is doing the surveillance and actually doing what I call germ games, where you practice. You say, okay, what if a bioterrorist brought smallpox?
Wake up!
To 10 airports, you know.
Bill Gates basically let the cat out of the bag. Smallpox and monkeypox are very closely related. But guess what? Shockingly, this new monkeypox strain or variant or whatever the hell they're going to call it spreads really easily from animal to human and from human to human, when it was really hard for it to make that jump before.
Monkeys, they're the ones that spread the virus.
Monkeys. Dying world.
And listen, Bill Gates is knee-deep in this monkeypox thing.
Knee-deep in the water somewhere.
Him, Fauci, Biden, the globalist elites, the WHO, they are all involved in this. Big Pharma, they're all involved in this.
Hey, we're the monkeys, and people say we monkey around, but we're too busy singing to put anybody down.
Who will help us?
Stripped of all that I once knew, so many things I cannot do. Do you think of me at all? Trapped inside these walls, while you're there on center stage. Can you speak? Can you be brave? And think of me at all? Hear my desperate calls. No more silence, please. Do not turn away. My life is worth the same. Hear my desperate cries. See my shattered dreams. You can make this right. Call my name and save me. I did what you asked me to. What if I was you? Would you silence you too?
My career of 19 years, that I took almost 14 years to train for, is likely over.
I was loyal to the fight. I lined up to do what's right. Do you think of me at all? Knowing I might fall. Now I'm burning black and blue from all the hate I never knew. Do you think of me at all? When I didn't fit your goal. No more silence, please. Do not turn away. My life is worth the same. Hear my desperate cries. See my shattered dreams. You can make this right. Call my name and save me. I did what you asked me to. What if I was you? Would you silence you too?
I've been bedridden, unable to work, and unable to exercise for months.
Numbness, throat tightness, tachycardia, wild fluctuating blood pressures.
No more silence, please.
They said it was safe.
Do not turn away. My life is worth the same.
Now I go home to an empty house.
Hear my desperate cries. See my shattered dreams. You can make this right. Call my name and save me. I did what you asked me to. What if I was you? Would you silence you too?
Today, I am an unemployed paraplegic who's learning an entire new lifestyle.
I lost my ability to speak naturally. I've become unable to walk without a walker and never know if or when the tremors will come or go.
Who will help us?
The COVID-19 vaccine has not been proven safe and effective. It's a new technology and it's been tested on a few thousands of people in a few months. Please do your own research. This is not a real medical pandemic.
This pandemic is not a real medical pandemic. The COVID-19 vaccine is not proven safe or effective because there has not been enough time. In addition, there is not a clear definition of any new disease for which it can be tested against. There has not been a virus that has been purified or shown to be the cause of an illness. Thus, there is no target for a vaccine.
The corona vaccine is not proven safe or effective. There is no medical emergency. It is a fake pandemic. The coronavirus is in terms of harmfulness, mortality and transmissibility comparable to a seasonal flu.
And I'd like to say that the new COVID-19 vaccine is not safe and that there is no global medical pandemic. For almost 20 years, the pharmaceutical industry has been trying to develop corona vaccines, but never managed, because they saw in the animal trials that there were serious side effects, autoimmune disorders, when the animal was exposed to a new wild-type virus. This means that we humans will be the guinea pigs.
Do not take this vaccine. This vaccine is dangerous. This pandemic is a fraud.
The COVID-19 vaccines are not proven to be safe or effective. We believe that it is reckless and unnecessary to roll out these essentially experimental vaccines that are using a completely new mRNA technology to millions of people, when there is only limited short-term safety data, no evidence that they will prevent transmission of the virus, and no long-term safety data.
We know that we can treat the symptoms of COVID-19 very successfully with vitamins D, C, and zinc, and with very safe medicines. And also, a vaccine is then also not necessary, but that in the safety studies, there was significant adverse events and death in the animals that were used in these studies over the past 20 years.
It was all orchestrated to make you fearful enough to take the vaccine. This vaccine is just not proven safe. It has been developed too quickly. We have no idea what the long-term effects will be. It needs much more investigation.
The COVID-19 vaccine is not proven safe nor effective. And I think it's unacceptable that all liabilities have been waived for the companies that are producing it. If pharma doesn't take responsibility for the products they make, how can they expect doctors to inject them to their patients without doubt of doing harm?
And I just want to remind people that we have to remember that health does not come from the injection of toxins into our bodies.
I am here to tell you that I will not take the COVID-19 vaccine, and I will not recommend the COVID-19 vaccine for any of my patients. This vaccine is experimental on the human race because they are proposing to use modified messenger RNA or modified DNA, synthetic to the human body. This is the first time ever this will ever be launched on the human race. We don't know what could happen to us. In addition, they're proposing to use nanolipid technology or nanotechnology on the human race as well. There are so many different awful things that can happen to us, and we need to investigate this before we go forward. This is my alarm call to the world.
Know that when they develop this, it's under the umbrella of the 2005 PrEP Act. They have complete liability protection. You can't sue them, and you have no recourse if this vaccine harms you. They have been trying to develop a coronavirus vaccine since 2002, since we had SARS. And every animal study that they've done, ferret studies, rabbits, and rat studies, all the animals ended up with a paradoxical immune response in which the antibody levels that were very high actually accelerated the infection, made it much worse, and allowed the pieces of the virus to go inside of the cell and be incorporated into the DNA of the recipient of that vaccine by a process called transduction. That transduction irreversibly puts that snip of virus into your DNA and transforms your cells.
We want to alert you to the fact that the current COVID vaccines are an experimental product based on the injection of genetic material into our cells. And the risk of using these new technologies on humans and the environment are unknown. while they could have irreversible consequences. In April, the Pandemic Accelerator Act of the European Union allowed vaccine producers to have a free pass for safety. And on July 15, the European Parliament agreed to remove the need of risk evaluation. It is extremely important to understand that the current COVID vaccines are not proven safe.
I have to shout out that this is not a real medical pandemic, and the COVID-19 vaccine is not proven to be safe or effective. I agree with the British Medical Journal that the testing is not done honestly. The claimed 90% effect is really only 0.2% if you study the results. I wonder, why did Gates and his conspiracy terrorists spend billions to develop vaccines that can sterilize men, women, and even their unborn children?
And there is no pandemic, and the vaccine is neither safe nor effective. And to give an untested vaccine to entire humanity and use them as guinea pigs is complete madness and nothing else, and we must stop it now. And then there's only side effects and risks and costs, and that's a waste of money and waste of human life.
Do I believe there is a pandemic? Absolutely not. There's no evidence of that. Do I believe that COVID-19 exists? Absolutely not. It has never been proven. Do I believe that the population need this new COVID-19 dangerous vaccine that's not had the safety trials done and it hasn't ever been done before? Absolutely not. No one needs it. Do I believe that our government should be arrested for possibly genocide? Absolutely.
This is the magnitude of evil we are dealing with. We are dealing with people who have the money, the power to pollute the entire human genome. I think because of this, we're going to lose about 1 billion children. So any mother to be, even if she is not pregnant yet, if she gets an mRNA vaccine, those mRNAs are going to go to the ovaries. There's DNA that stays silent, that is never transcribed into proteins until the next generation. And it'll only show up when that adult tries to have another child. 5 billion people have been injected so far on this planet. Half of them are women. 2.5 billion. Half of them will be women who are young enough to have children. There are 1.25 billion carriers of mutations in the egg cell line of their bodies. 1.25 million women who are capable of giving birth to children who carry something that has never been seen before in the human species, in the entire human genome. I won't be able to tell until problems start happening in the children and grandchildren and the great-grandchildren. This is the magnitude of evil we are dealing with.
I think the excess mortality that we're seeing and that we've seen since the vaccine rollout, first of all, it's historically unprecedented, right? I mean, a few months ago, a number of life insurance companies were reporting increases in life insurance claims for young working age Americans, 18 to 65, between 18, 23, and up to 40%. And then Lincoln Financial, the 5th largest life insurance company in the country, just a week ago announced that in the last quarter of 2021, I think it was the last quarter, 163% increase in life insurance claims over historical baselines. And here's the thing though, Greg, those are the acute things. Those are the drop deads, the sudden cardiac arrest, the falling, the heart attacks and strokes. the excess mortality of the stuff that the cancers we're seeing, those cancers are going to continue to rage throughout the vaccinated population. And that's going to be going on for some time. And you're going to see it in young people. We're always seeing, everything that's been happening in those hospitals. And that's why the silence of the hospitals is so terrifying. And I was going to write this Substack post called "The Silence of the Deans." And the deans are a dean of a medical school. Is an extremely powerful position. There's only about 126 of them, big academic medical centers in the country. And to know that the deans sitting atop of these major medical centers where neurologists and cardiologists and obstetrician and gynecologists have been seeing strokes, infertility, heart attacks in people with no comorbidities at very young ages. A lot of the doctors and inside know. There's no way that the leaders of these healthcare institutions didn't know. Not one spoke up.
Andreas Skofbeck, a board member of BKK Pro Vita German public health insurer, says that the insurers received 244,576 cases of vaccine adverse events after corona vaccination were reported for the calendar year 2021. This is from a total of 10,937,716 insured persons, making it a total of 2.3%, which is almost 8 times higher than the declared value of 0.3% by Germany Paul-Ehrlich Institute for Vaccines and Biomedicines. In response, German Health Minister Karl Lauterbach released a video tweet that admits that the corona vaccine can have serious side effects, but added those were rare.
Manchmal vor, zum Beispiel Thrombosen im Gehirn, die können tödlich verlaufen, aber das ist sehr selten. Weniger als einer von 25.000 entwickelt überhaupt die Komplikationen, und bei einem kleinen Teil dieser wiederum ist die Komplikation tödlich. Die Wahrscheinlichkeit an Covid zu versterben ist viel, viel, viel höher.
However, replies to his tweet had urged his ministry not to sidestep the matter but to proceed with correcting those erroneous figures.
Suspiciously, Kary Mullis died of an upper respiratory illness just a few months before the big COVID psyop. That little operation this year that told you over and over again that more and more, quote, asymptomatic people were testing positive via the PCR test. Those charts are pretty scary looking, unless you actually know what you're looking at.
Oh my God. It's sky high.
Ha! It is actually rock bottom. Ha ha! Fooled you.
I wonder what Kary would have had to say about all this, but I bet I have a pretty good idea of what he would have said.
And the scientific industrial establishment was born, and out of that came a lot of scientists who were in there for the money. They were the same people that later went into medical school, because there was money in it.
Kary, how do they misuse PCR to estimate all these supposed free viral RNAs that may or may not be there?
I think misuse PCR is not quite. I don't think you can misuse PCR. No, the results, the interpretation of it, doesn't tell you that you're sick, and it doesn't tell you that the thing you ended up with really was going to hurt you or anything like that. See, if you can say, if they could find this virus in you at all, and with PCR, if you do it well, you can find almost anything in anybody.
The PCR technique went on to become the central technique used in biochemistry and molecular biology.
It's a way that you can produce a little teeny piece of DNA, a specific one, out of the whole genome, and make as many copies of it as you wanted to, and there's no limit.
So that alone definitely gives it merit. The New York Times described his invention as, quote, highly original and significant, virtually dividing biology into two epochs of before PCR and after PCR. And that is a fact. I followed the science, and this is what I discovered.
What is it? What is it about humanity that wants to go to all the details and stuff and listen? You know, these guys like Fauci get up there and start talking. You know, he doesn't know anything really about anything, and I'd say that to his face. Nothing. The man thinks you can take a blood sample and stick it in an electron microscope, and if it's got a virus in there, you'll know it. He doesn't understand electron microscopy, and he doesn't understand medicine. He should not be in a position like he's in. Most of those guys up there on the top are just total administrative people, and they don't know anything about what's going on at the bottom. You know, those guys have got an agenda.
Dr. Rainer Fuellmich is the leading lawyer and member of the German Corona Investigative Committee. Dr. Rainer Fuellmich, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
The Germans, in particular, the German judiciary, is a bunch of cowards. They're in it for the money. They're in it for their careers. I don't think I can count on anyone. And we set up the Corona Investigative Committee on July 10th. Wanted answers to those questions which we believe our government, which is not our government anymore, and the mainstream media, which are owned, of course, by the same people who are owning this corona pandemic, that they wouldn't give us any answers to. How dangerous is the virus? How reliable is the PCR test? And how much damage do the anti-corona measures do? In the meantime, we know that it's devastating, and that's why we talk about crimes against humanity. The latest evidence is so compelling. PCR test, which he claims can tell us something about infections, which is a complete lie. That guy and his British counterpart, Neil Ferguson, both of them are blatant liars. They had come very far. They had, in fact, helped the pharmaceutical industry introduce their vaccines. Even then, it didn't work that well in Germany, but in the Scandinavian countries, they vaccinated lots of people. And through this vaccination now, there's 1,300 children, young adults now, who are permanently disabled because they suffer from narcolepsy. So that's how it all started. I just spoke with Dr. Mike Yeadon, former vice president of Pfizer.
I was about to ask you about this because what I've heard is that this is not about money. This original plan was to roll it out back all the way in 2050, but they've accelerated it. And this recent finding from Mike Yeadon and others is that this is worse than what happened in World War II. And we've found evidence, undeniable evidence, that this is a kill shot, either being used to murder or maim people. Could you please go into those findings for us?
Yes, this is the most recent findings that Dr. Mike Yeadon came up with, but he does emphasize he's not the only one. This is a group of 5 or 6 scientists. It's just that he's the one, I think, who connected the dots.
I'm anti-unsafe medicines, regardless of what format they are. But on this occasion, it allowed me quite quickly to work out that what we were being told about this virus and what we needed to do in order to stay safe was simply not true. For example, early on in the UK, there were enormous changes made in attribution of causes of death. So we've never had anything as absurd as the rule that is now used. So if you should die within 28 days of having a positive result in an inappropriate test using molecular biology, then you would be declared to have died of COVID-19. That's just wrong. It's not just a matter of disagreeing professionally, it's just complete nonsense. And we can certainly talk about the unreliability, untrustworthy nature of PCR testing, but also things like lockdown. I mean, just the whole phrase of it, the fact that it was completely unprecedented, and that we basically were to minimize contact one with another, and that was going to save us. I knew quite early on that was rubbish, and the reason is simple, that only people who are ill and have symptoms are really strong infectious risks to other people. And those people are not people who are walking around in the community, because if you're full of virus and symptomatic, you are also ill. And ill people tend to stay at home or in bed, or if they're very serious, they end up in hospital or die. And so the idea that if you cut normal contacts at work and just civic society and your normal economy, that would slow epidemic spreading, I was fairly sure fairly on that was bunk. And unfortunately, it took several months before that was clear, by which time the